Hey guys, so I'm Babs. I head up our creative portion of programmatic team within Mindshare. Subsequent to Mindshare, I was at Funsail, so I worked as a solutions engineer. And subsequent to that, I was at Sky, Sports and News International retrospectively. Today I wanted to kind of talk through our approach to programmatic creative. We run this session with creative agencies because we understand that there's a massive issue and a problem when it comes to aligning creative with the advancements within media and data. This workshop is kind of cut down because of time, but essentially we'll kind of go through our methodology, how we came about with our methodology, and how we implement that methodology for creative agencies to really understand how to run a data-driven campaign. Let's get started. So this piece is just really on the importance of programmatic, for programmatic creative. When I think of programmatic can be split into two things. One is the media end, the buying process, so the automated buying and selling of media. And on the other side, which we'll talk a lot about today, is sort of the creative side of programmatic. So the alignment of data and technology to make sure that the message is relevant for the user. For us, the biggest issue for creative agencies for me was along the language. We have a bunch of acronyms that exist within programmatic, and half of us in here sort of get lost with that. You can imagine what creative agencies are like. So essentially what we did is we approached it from a language perspective, and one of the pieces that we talk with our creative agencies with is really this story of Jean-Francois Chapelon and how he utilized the Rosetta Stone to solve language issues in and around the hieroglyphics. Essentially, he went back and took old language in Coptic demonic symbols and utilized Greek language in combination with the Rosetta Stone to resolve the issue. We took a very similar approach in regards to sort of looking back at traditional print. What was the language within traditional print? I remember sort of inkjet printers being a thing of the past. Traditional TV, I still remember there being sort of 4 channels. It's actually not changed too much, specifically when you talk about linear. And then we look at sort of out of home, and one of the issues that was quite prevalent during out of home is sort of DPI, so essentially dots per inch. So it's sort of translating something that might sit on your small screen to something that's going to sit on a large display board. Now, with the digital age, we came along with a new language. We had macros, so we had the ability to kind of target a large amount of people. We also had red Rebby images. Oh God, I say that totally terribly. But essentially, that allowed us to sort of create these animations that were sort of low file, really frame by frame, but at the time were sort of revolutionary. Digital as we see today, we kind of adopted these 3 languages to really help our creative agencies understand the scope of launching a data-driven campaign. For today, we'll only really look at signals, but all 4 are really important, and I'd love to kind of share this with you if you're interested afterwards. Essentially, when we think about signals, when we talk about signals with our creative agencies, we're just really aligning them with the ability to guide. So we can utilize data points that exist specifically within DMPs to allow us to kind of attribute data to creative, which I'll run through today. Some of the benefits, which will come in the subsequent slides, will be around aligning data with the storytelling. So at that top tier of creating a sort of brand story, really aligning a data strategy along the creative build itself. Subsequent to that, we'll then look at aligning signals with data for our platforms, for our tech enablement platforms, some of which we've discussed today in Celtra and Seismic. And then subsequently, we'll show how we distribute using signals, so using creative matrices, for example, which again sort of ties to the Googles and the Seismics of the world. When we think about data and we want to apply that data for us to the creative thinking, data is a very big, we talked about it, I think I've heard about it today and I heard about it yesterday, but there's a huge amount of data there. In fact, one of our platforms contains something along the lines of about 90 quintillion, which is a number that has about 25 zeros after it. But essentially there's a lot of data out there, and the way that we understand this data is quite simple. We put them into segments, understandable segments in languages that creative agencies understand. So the example might be personality. We could run a campaign that looked at spending types and utilize data from there, and/or state of mind. Another could be demographics. Demographics is one that we use quite, is recognizable quite quickly. Age and gender is something we use quite a lot in attributing data to creative. Intention is another one that's very interesting for us. and obviously interest. But when creatives look at data, our perception is to look at how big the data is or all the data that exists out there. Our perception is what data is relevant for the KPIs you're launching for your campaign. Essentially, once those data segments has been chosen, this is an alignment between both us, the agency, and the creative agency. We then look at how we apply the data to creative variation. Now, I've just gone along and chosen 4 data segments along geo, gender, and sports site, which we'll focus on for the majority of this sort of workshop. But in regards to the creative build itself, the creative can be anything. We can run programmatic or automated buys across a few channels now, not just display, not just mobile, and not just native. We have the ability to run out-of-home display with companies like Bidstack. We have the ability to run connected TV, programmatic across connected TV with partnerships like Innovid and Roku, for example. I'm just going to simplify the creative build itself just to show how we actually align the data with creative. And it's really simple. If we have a creative on the left, it doesn't really matter what that creative is, but essentially it has like a message, a logo, a CTA, and a product image. Essentially, all we're doing with the data is looking granular at the data and what is that we can attribute directly to the KPI. So the example may be, we want to look at national locations, which might be applicable to a brand like Nike, for example, who is a national brand. We might look locally at London versus Birmingham versus, Manchester. And again, that might work for some of our airline brands. We even have the ability now to look teragraphically at location data through companies like Factual, who can allow us to sort of identify devices a meter away from a brand. The example being, I'm a meter away from McDonald's or I'm 5 meters away from McDonald's. We find you via Factual and then serve you an ad at the right time. We can apply data in the same mindset across gender. Through our DMPs, there's a list of gender segments that we can utilize. And sports types. Sports types is a really interesting one for me because rather than looking quite granularly at, football versus hiking versus, boxing, we should look at personas and lookalikes. That's part and parcel of what we discuss with our creative agencies, and even the notion of lookalikes, we sort of sit down and kind of talk them through how we align party data to almost look like part of the data that we essentially want to utilize for the campaign. Subsequent to that, we're then essentially applying the data, the creative variation with the data that we have. Now, this is a visual representation of what we call a matrix. And essentially, when we utilize a matrix, all its job is to attribute data to content that exists on the creative itself. In the example here, and I'm not sure if you guys can hear me because I'm not sure if this is working, but if you look from far left to right, it'll kind of make more sense. On the left, we have the creative design. Now, as I said, the creative design can be whatever you want. It could be a video piece, it could be a native piece, it could be along all the channels we've discussed. Essentially, we identify what elements we're going to make dynamic. Now, through a HTML file, we might do that through IDs that exist within the function itself. Subsequent to that, once we identify what elements or what content is going to be made dynamic within our creative, we then associate it to a creative matrix. Now, quite simply put, it's the same data that we just saw from the previous slide. So we have geo on the far left in UK, Switzerland, and Germany. We have gender in the middle, which is men, women, and both. And then subsequently on the right, we have sports type, which is hiking, biking, and all sports. Now, essentially, all we've really done is just sparse out the data and combine the data to have a variation of data choices to affect our creative. Now, when we put that through our ad platform, and we can talk on the ad platforms that do this. Some of them are sort of Google. My ex-company, Spuncell, Painter did something along the lines of a creative matrix, but we have 4,000 plus tech enablement platforms that we can utilize this sort of practice on. Essentially, once it goes through our ad platform, the creative variation then becomes tied to the data itself. So if we look at line item number 1 at the top, UK men and hiking, put through our ad platform and associate it to our creative design, we then have elements that can be affected. So the example here is that we could have a UK background, for example, product image on the right, and then the message could be bespoke to the segments that we have. Subsequently, we could do the same thing with line item number 4 and line item number 7. Now, every time I run this, someone in the crowd says to me, well, how does this look with an actual creative? How do we actually do this without this wireframe example you have here? So I decided to go ahead and build one. Now, the correct design itself could be anything. So this could be a vertical video piece that sits on Snapchat. It actually is just an animated piece from Booking.com, which I put through one of our platforms in order to sort of scale. But thinking in the same premise of the wireframe example I just showed earlier, essentially, if we had our first line item in UK men and hiking and associated directly to the creative itself, in terms of dynamic elements, essentially we want to make sure that I'll just let it do a rotation so I can kind of attribute the dynamic elements on the ad to the dynamic elements that sit on the right. If you just bear with me. So image number 1 is going to be a hiking image relating to the hiking segment we have. We'll then have copy coming in that's Switzerland but in English, which is UK bound. Our second image could be a Switzerland image of some sort, for example, and then we could have an end copy that is in English as well as a CTA in English. Now, when we look at line item number 7, and we're utilizing totally different segments in German for both men and women and hiking, we can then attribute those data segments to the creative that we have, to the content we have, and start being really clever about how we present that content in the same official, essentially the same design template. Now for us, this isn't new, this isn't something this is a point of view. There's a ton of ways that we can connect data to creative and be really smart about the way we do it. In closing, for me, the most important thing is we can align data with as much as we want, but key to what we're doing is ensuring that we're meeting our client KPIs and ensuring that we're not intrusive for our users. And when we're giving our users quality content that for me is, depending on what channel you're on, you want something that is very much interested in or affects your life in some sort of way. Now, the only way that can be done, as we talked about earlier, is really through data and targeting. Nike might have a great message that they want to send out to their users, but to the wrong user, that message is disruptive. That message is something that I don't want to see, and actually that's why we see such a rise in ad blocking from my perspective. Finally is available assets. Now, there was a lovely young lady in the back that spoke about what we're doing in regards to resolving the problems in and around viewability and ad blocking with creatives. This is something that we believe is an industry problem, and we within Mindshare have taken this as a responsibility to sit with creative agencies and really talk them through understanding the assets that we should be provided with, understand it along the lean process, for one. And then secondly is ensuring that standards are met. So, content is bespoke, content is interesting, content is engageable, and then content is connected as well, connected through the various ways we talked about, specifically through data. And that's it. Thank you so much.